Thank you. Welcome, Natalie and Gloria.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'm sorry about the sunlight. I feel like it's a halo around me. So excited.
You're lucky you have it.
I did something right in my life, I guess. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, and actually the end of the last presentation was like the perfect segue for this. So Natalie, I want to start by discussing a little bit about some of the trends that we as marketers, whether you're in brand or growth, it really doesn't matter. Some of the trends that we're seeing for 2022, for example, D2C, everyone seems to be shifting back to D2C and, trying to grapple how we learn more about our customers without relying on third-party data. And are we focusing on the brand? Are we focusing on growth? So how do you approach all of these so-called trends, and what are you feeling and seeing as a trend that you're trying to grapple with or get around?
Yeah, I think, for me, the biggest trend that I'm grappling with is the combination of those two things and how you can approach your marketing without assuming that brand marketing and growth marketing have to be mutually exclusive. I think that the trend has to be moving away from those being two distinct approaches to marketing to having one approach to marketing that can achieve both objectives in different ways. And I think there are some great examples in the marketplace right now of brands who are doing this well. McDonald's with their special meals that they're doing, whether it's Travis Scott or BTS, like there's a huge brand message that they're giving by partnering with those musicians who have such huge fan bases. But on the flip side, it's driving huge sales and they're selling out of the things that are part of those meals. And so I think that it's something that can be done. And for a long time, we as marketers were sort of trained that it couldn't, that if you wanted to drive the business, you had to be retail, you had to be starbursts and terrible graphics. And it was all about the optimization of online creative, and brand couldn't be held accountable to drive real revenue. And I just don't think that's true.
And that opens up a big can of worms, obviously, for most marketers. And then you have to take a step back and look at things. Well, okay, what is our strategy? And then what are the resources that we're putting against it? And how are we set up? Can we support this? Can you talk a little bit about where you think some of those blockers might be to being able to mesh the two things together?
Mm-hmm. I think there are a few. I think org structure is is probably one of the hardest hurdles to this, because the way people have built their careers in a lot of cases is choosing a side. And now moving to a place where the people who have had experience on both sides, I think, are going to be set up for more success. But you have to have leaders who are going to build their orgs to accommodate that. And it's something I'm struggling with in building my team as well, because you want to ensure that you're holding people accountable for those objectives that you want to achieve, but give them a little bit more flexibility, give them room to take risks the way that maybe the brand team has that your performance media team doesn't have. And so it's a problem that I haven't quite solved yet.
I was going to say, how do you balance giving the leeway to experiment, but maybe if your KPIs are a measure of your success, then are people going to be risk averse and trying new things? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think for us, like one example, what helped with my team, where I think we're maybe more willing to take risk, is we did a program called Swell Fares, which was, it was a fare sale. At the end of the day, it was a percentage off airfare, but it was based on the level of the surf. And so as the level of the surf went up, your discount went down. It was database selling. And what it did is it created a great brand moment for us. It generated a ton of PR. And I think it showed everyone on the team and at our agencies that something as sort of benign as a fare sale could actually be a big brand moment and help us tell a story and help us get a lot more attention than just, throwing a 20% off on a digital ad, because we know that's what gets the highest CTI.
So would you say that in a post-pandemic world, this is the right time to experiment and try new things? Is it okay to just kind of unleash and try things like that, and try to make people take a bit of a pause and a step back to say, this is why the brand and the growth can't be separated. Is this the time to test that? Have you been doing more of that?
Yeah, for sure. We have, COVID has been, has given us an opportunity to be more promotional. So typically an airline, it's very rare to do promotions. We don't do them very often. But during COVID, when there was no business travel to fill the flights and people were less likely to travel, it did force us to become more creative and really do more testing with promotions. And having done, now basically for 1.5 years, we've had a test bed of running consistent promotions, I think has helped us really discover where we can be creative and what's not worth the work. There are some things that didn't work and you realize, that was too heavy of a lift. We don't need to do that next time. And so that has been really fantastic from us, because there's really no period in time in history since 9/11 when airlines have been promotional, when airlines have been this promotional and discounted this often. So the need for creativity was really apparent.
And do you feel that that's also helped to guide, really, because you had no choice, a lot of the rethinking of your content strategy and how you approach the various digital channels that you have and leverage? Have you been experimenting with new channels, changing the content thought process? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we definitely, we had to look a little bit more into leisure travel and what was driving leisure travel. And there was a different dynamic during COVID of why people were traveling. It became much more meaningful. So it was a lot less about, you just want to go to the beach or you want to go to Disneyland. It was, you want to go celebrate a wedding that you've had to postpone twice, or you want to go see your grandparents that you haven't seen. And so that put a different spin on our marketing when we wanted to tell a more meaningful story. And then there was also just this layer of concern about safety and cleanliness. And so you saw all the airlines double down on that. And we saw that, every brand at the time was doing this in these unprecedented times type videos and advertising. And it was very heavy and sad, sort of tug at your heartstrings. And we knew that we wanted to get a message across that reassured people about the safety of travel, but also brought some joy to them. And so we created this music video. We rewrote the song Safety Dance from the 80s, turned it into an ad. And it was originally meant to just be social video. We ran it on TikTok. We entered TikTok during COVID, like a lot of people. And we did, we had our flight attendants do a version of the dance that's featured in the video. And that safety dance content just completely took off so well that we ended up putting it on the Super Bowl. We ended up running it a lot more than we had intended, expanding it throughout the West Coast. And so that was a great way for us to take a customer insight and a message we knew we needed to get across, but do it in a way that was unlike anything any other travel brand was doing.
And I remember it well, because I remember thinking to myself, maybe people now will figure out that Alaska Airlines doesn't just fly to Alaska and that they're kind of cool. Could you talk a little bit about, because I know as a brand, that has to probably be a huge challenge, as whether it's COVID, not COVID, all of these things that you're trying to grapple with and all of the competition out there. Could you talk a little bit about how you try to get that message across in a meaningful way? Yeah,
it's a deep-seated belief. And it's not helped by the fact that we have a native Alaska native on our tail as well. We try to approach it from a few ways. One is our brand has always been a very quirky brand. And so we always have a bit of a sense of humor in how we do things. And so we try to lean into humor as much as possible. And even if it's not slapstick humor, it's things that make you smile, that stand out a little bit more, like Safety Dance. So that is one. The other two is we believe that the experience speaks for itself. And when people come in and have the experience, they tell their friends about it, they talk about it. If you ask someone, especially in the Pacific Northwest, if they like Alaska Airlines, they will say they love Alaska Airlines. I've never worked for a brand with as much brand love as Alaska has. And so that goes a long way. And then we have an incredibly generous mileage plan and credit card program. And so again, then it's just the numbers speak for themselves. And it's like, if you don't believe us from the experience, you don't believe your friends, then just look at the numbers and you earn more miles with us. Why would you fly anywhere else? And so we try to appeal to the left and right brain of any potential loyal flyer that we can find.
That's amazing. So on that, when you think about growing, expanding on your customer base and your loyalty base, with all of the challenges, especially now, and people still feeling a little iffy about travel, et cetera, are there certain channels that you find are becoming just more effective that, had it not been for dealing with a COVID or post-COVID world, that you probably would never even have experimented with? And do you plan to use those channels more effectively in the future?
Yeah, so when there are a few. I think TikTok, we see a lot of value in, and partly I'll combine two channels, because there's TikTok and then the employee channel. We have a really engaged employee group. They're fantastic. They're the most caring individuals. We like to say we recruit teachers and former nurses to work at our airline, and you feel that when you experience our flights. And so they are our best advocates and ambassadors, and we really want to help empower them to tell those stories. And TikTok has been a great platform where you see some of the best airline content on TikTok is coming from Alaska Airlines, flight attendants and ground crew. And so what we now need to do is just, how do we harness that? How do we keep their creativity going? We don't want it to feel too corporate. We don't want to brand control it, but we want to amplify it as much as we can. And so I think that those are both huge opportunities for us. Email continues to be a consistent, revenue driver for us. And so we'll continue to invest in email and make sure that we're delivering personalized and interesting content for everyone.
Do you have these moments where suddenly you wake up in the morning and your inbox is filled with new ideas for a TikTok from some of your, internal employees?
So I am the most active person on TikTok. So it's usually the other way around. It's often me sending them links to TikToks and trends that I think that we should be doing. So I still have asked them to do more for us, because I think that there should be multiple people active on TikTok coming up with these ideas.
I love that. And have you ever thought about expanding that? You talk a lot how important it is, and I agree, to make your employees your brand advocates, basically. But people do have a wonderful experience when they fly Alaska. I have flown Alaska on several trips back and forth, lots of reasons for business, and always had a great experience. Have you thought about expanding and getting more user-generated content to leverage, especially like with TikTok? Seems like for some reason, everyone loses their inhibitions when it comes to TikTok. So, and being such a fun brand in your presence, have you thought about leveraging that more?
Yeah, we've gone through phases where we've leaned really heavily into user-generated content versus our own. There are a few that we have an on-staff photographer and videographer and a really creative social team. And so they're able to generate what feels like what is high production value content. So we often don't need to rely on UGC. The challenge for us with UGC is the amount of resources it takes. It's almost more work to manage promoting UGC content than it is for us to just send the photographer out, capture content, and run it. And so it's a balance for us. We also have a competitor who uses a lot of UGC. And so when we do it, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's unique for us and really is the Alaska way.
That's awesome. We actually have a quick question. It's not the Q&A time, but someone did chat a really interesting comment on this same topic that I just wanted to come back to you with. And it says, from your experience, how hard is it to come up with relevant, authentic, good content day in and day out and be able to serve all channels?
It's hard.
In and of itself.
Yeah, it is. And I think you see certain channels being neglected a little bit in that sense. Right now, TikTok is a little bit the golden child, and you want to create awesome content for TikTok. And I think that's working for Instagram Reels as well, but doesn't always work for Instagram Stories. And so I would say we prioritize Instagram Stories and TikToks first, which means then maybe your Facebook posts are not getting all of the creativity and attention that other ones might. Luckily, I think Facebook creatively, you don't see a variation in engagement as much. Like you don't need to put in the level of work to a Facebook post that you really do to get the engagement that you want out of a story or a TikTok.
Well, and I think too, and I've through the years, you learn that you don't necessarily have to be on every channel either. If it's just not the right channel for you, then you can't force it. And you can't just take the same content and reformat it to that particular screen or that particular shape. So, because content is still key. And as we go into 2022, content is seeing this huge resurgence for all the obvious reasons. So have you ever sat back and say, you know what? Maybe we don't need to have all of those channels active, or they just have to serve very different purposes. Do you grapple with that?
We do. There are certain channels that we might deprioritize, I think, but in general, we try to post consistently across all of the channels. But there might be instances where there are topics where we say, like, that's just a Twitter topic. We can tweet about it and move on. It doesn't, maybe it doesn't have an image that's associated with it, so we can keep it to Twitter. There are topics that we would leave off of Facebook because we knew it created too much contention in the comments and it wasn't worth it. And so there were things that we would ignore the channel in that sense. But ultimately, I think we still try and keep a pretty good drumbeat across the channels. If we neglect any channel, I think it's probably YouTube, right, because we're not consistently creating longer form video content.
Right. And it does seem that the longer form video content is seeing a bit of a downswing. I've seen that in general. And I think, the TikToks of the world have 100% impacted that. And actually, there's one more question on the same topic, and then we'll move on to another one. But how do you see the incrementality of your partners and channels that you use for your content? And, which is kind of the final point of this, right? Is there incrementality? And if you keep them all, or if you decide not to focus on them, are you still seeing that incremental growth that you're hoping for?
Mm-hmm. I would say we're still tracking that. We're using Google attribution now to understand more specifically the role that each of the social channels is playing in driving incrementality. And the dynamic, understanding, and I'm not sure any brand has really solved this problem, but truly understanding the interaction between organic and paid social and how that is lifting, whether the organic work is actually lifting the performance of paid and vice versa. So we're still working through that. I would say, luckily, there's a lot of support from our executives for social, and it's not always held accountable for revenue, even though it actually is a pretty good revenue driver for us. So it's a great testing ground for us. We're allowed to use it as a channel that can drive the brand and also drive revenue and drive mileage plan memberships, can actually drive other business objectives. So it's sort of the perfect sandbox for us for the brand.
Well, and it's a sandbox where you can react quickly versus the traditional marketing tools that we have in our toolbox, which take a little longer and you need to see trend lines, et cetera. Whereas you'll know pretty quickly on a digital social platform just what the effect is, good, bad, or indifferent.
Right. For sure.
So yeah, it was just some great questions. We could talk about this till the cows come home, literally. Well, I want to switch a little bit because we're going to run out of time, and I do want to leave time for some Q&A. Everyone's asking this, of course, and we're all talking about this post-COVID world and dealing with the adversities, whether, we've all had to deal with adjusting to our new normals. And, but how has it affected, what has been the biggest challenge to get over some of this adversity, whether it's, from a marketing perspective and feel like you're not, you have to balance, there's some real things happening in the world, and does it feel okay to be joyful and happy, or are we supposed to be sad? Like, how do you as a brand deal with that type of adversity, and coming out of it, what have been some of the lessons that you've learned?
Yeah, I think that, there was a lot of adversity that came through for varying topics too, right? It wasn't just COVID. There was Black Lives Matter, and there were other movements that were happening.
Mental health.
Yeah, our company is a very progressive company. We took a stand on a lot of issues. And one of the things that I think was really helpful for my team is when these things would happen that felt like sort of soul crushing to people, whether it's January 6th or the George Floyd murder, I did Teams meetings with my entire team first thing that next morning where they could just talk, just open, transparent, make sure people understand that we care about you as a person. We realize it's really hard to expect you to go make a funny TikTok after all of this stuff is happening in the world. And so giving space to have those conversations, I think, was really important. And the company overall too, in taking these big stances, I also think helped people feel like this is a company that cares. We want everyone to feel like they belong. We happened to launch a new aircraft, a custom aircraft that we designed with the UNCF around the time of the George Floyd verdict coming out. And so the topic of education for African Americans and going into historically Black colleges and telling the story of Alaska, but also showing that we understood what was happening in the market, in the world, I think was really powerful and helped our employees feel better about our stance, and also positioned us as more of a thought leader in this space in a way that wasn't, we're not trying to sell you airline tickets. We're trying to deal with these topics that are really important to our communities that we serve and to our employees.
And I think that's a really good point, right? Because up until probably the last 2 years, it was almost taboo. It's like the old days you used to say, we never discuss politics and religion at the dinner table. Well, but this is the real world we live in. So how do you balance those messages and give your employees the space to feel, that they can breathe and they can have their own thoughts? I would assume that doing so has led to better engagement really across the board, and probably why more people are willing to, they stand behind your brand because you stand behind them in some way, shape, or form. Do you find that that's been a big turning point coming out of COVID? And do you hope to sustain that momentum?
I think so. And as the only airline based on the West Coast is a more progressive part of the country. I think us having these values that we believe in and that we stand behind is really important. And I do think it impacts how people view our brand and what they think of us. And so I'm incredibly proud of the stances that we take. This summer we launched a pride plane in partnership with our what we call GLOBE, which is our gay, lesbian, I'm not going to get the acronym right, but our LGBTQ employees. We did a pride themed plane, and that was incredibly fun and celebratory. And so I think doing things like that is something unique to a West Coast airline. I think we're one of the few who could actually pull these things off because it is authentic and people know that it's coming from who we are and from our values.
That's amazing. I'm going to switch a little bit, but keeping on topic with dealing with adversity. And you said something which kind of hit home a little bit, which is so many things came up during this that you allowed your employees to just kind of talk to you about, or just let them breathe or listen. What kind of personal adversities have you had to deal with, whether it's now, in your past, and how do you continue to move forward? And quite frankly, Natalie, have one of the most positive outlooks on life that I've ever come across, because you're just such a pleasure.
Thank you. I had a really tough childhood growing up. I grew up very poor. My father abandoned our family when I was 7. My mother abandoned us when I was 13. And so I sort of knew nothing but struggle and strife. But when I was in college, I knew that that's not what my life was always going to be like. And so I've always been a very dedicated, type A person. And so incredibly ambitious. And I think just fighting through that adversity has given me a completely different perspective than most people have now that I'm in this leadership role and I'm surrounded by people who, maybe didn't go through that type of adversity. So it does keep me grounded, but it also, it helps me also want to take risks and want to push forward and do things differently, be maybe a little bit scrappier than others. So I appreciate that. One of the things that during COVID, our executives really pushed was the idea of transparent leadership. And so being more transparent with our teams. And so this story of adversity, like what I just shared about my personal life, I had not really ever shared that. It wasn't something that I ever felt comfortable putting out publicly. And over the past year during COVID, I think I have become a lot more open to that and willing to share that story. And the feedback I get is how much it resonates, because you realize, how many people have something similar that they're going through, or backgrounds that they're ashamed of. And, just helping people feel better about that is something that it's a role I hadn't expected to play, but I'm glad that it's helping.
Yeah. That's amazing. So I want to leave it open for a few. I'm sure we have some Q&As. So I'm just going to take a quick peek. So you talked about risk taking now, and you hope not to lose your nerve, basically.
Yes.
Do you mean that personally? Do you have some personal adventure you want to go on, or something you want to do that you're like, you know what, I think I'm going to climb Mount Everest next year?
Yeah, my risk taking that I take personally, I have a side hustle with my husband. We run an online shop called Oh Happy Day. And so that's a big risk for us. And that's been really fun. It's a way to be creative and lean into the things that I was interested in outside of work, and then use some of my work skills as well. I also personally, during COVID, I had never been someone who exercised or took care of myself. And during COVID, I lost 50 pounds. I stopped drinking. I made a lot of major life changes. And so now I'm trying to keep those up, but my risk level now has gone into more weightlifting. I actually want to be, able to lift more and take those risks. I'm a little scared of the barbell. So those are some of the things.
Amazing. I love that. You're getting a lot of congratulations, Natalie. Go, Natalie, on the chat. It's kind of fun to read. I'm going to take one more question. How do you measure brand impact, especially when it comes to performance versus brand? I know we touched upon that a little bit at the beginning. Do you have a moment to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways. Obviously, traditionally, we have a quarterly brand tracker that we do that looks at our unaided awareness, consideration, preference. So that's what our leaders look at. And so that's something that is always top of mind for me, to make sure that we're tracking towards that. I think the better measurement for me is when I'm seeing social sentiment and the social conversations, pair it back to us the things about our brand that I want them to believe. When you're seeing sort of in the quotes from our daily surveys that people, for us, our brand is about care. And so when I see people say that they feel cared about, or that they, feel like we actually took care of them while they were on this trip, or when they called in, that to me is then how I feel like we're truly getting the brand into people's hearts and minds. I'm in a Facebook group called, I think it's called Girls Who Love Travel. I don't love when they refer to women as girls, but it's called Girls Who Love Travel. It's a huge travel, and if you're a woman who travels, it's a wonderful Facebook community to join. They give fantastic travel advice to each other, but someone recently had posted that she was just booked on a flight on Alaska Airlines, and she had never heard of the airline before. And she said, is this going to be okay? Should I be worried? Her question came from a sense of, what am I doing to myself? I don't know anything about this airline. When I checked it, there were 397 comments to that post, and I could only find 2 negative comments. Every comment was, it was a cool experience. It was so great. They'll take care of you. You'll love it. And that's how you know, like, you're driving what you need to drive with your brand. Like, you're really delivering what people want. They're buying your tickets, they're flying you, and they're saying wonderful things about you. And so my job is now just to fuel that and get more people having those conversations.
That's amazing. So I know we're down to the last minute, but just one more quick question type of answer, almost like, give us your sensei futuristic view. Do you feel that there's any trend or adjustments that you anticipate post-pandemic world that you hope remain going forward?
The one that just happened is Emily Zuge. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but she's a designer on TikTok, more of like a comedian on TikTok, who claimed to be a graphic designer.
Amazing.
Redesigned logos for all these brands, and it was hilarious. Her humor is so dry, but the fact that every major brand changed their branding to her logo, it sort of, to me, broke up this idea that your brand is such a precious thing that can't be changed. And I hope that that sticks around. I hope that brands have more creativity and flexibility, with their brands and the way they take care of it. The Detroit Lions, which she did as Detroit Lions, created merchandise that they were selling with the
They were
brand.
brilliant. Her rebrands were amazing.
So good. They were so good. And the fact that all of the brands had a sense of humor, especially the brands that typically are not known for having a sense of humor, right? Like NFL brands are typically so precious about their ideas. For them to break it up, I think this is a pivot moment where we're now going to see brands take a lot more of that flexibility and do something different.
And show personality.
Totally. And
show personality. I think personality is so key in connecting with people and creating experiences, which I think, Alaska has done just so brilliantly over the years, but especially in this past year with your TikTok. I'm a big fan. So I speak from personal viewing experience at 2 a.m, but we won't talk about that. Amazing. Oh, everybody's like, yeah, love her. Love the rebrands. Well, Natalie, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm not sure.
Yes.
I actually don't want to hang up ever. I'm sure the brand innovators will at some point come out and bring me and take me out. Yep, see, there they are. There, cue it up now. But thank you so much for sharing your insights, especially for sharing your personal story is very, very inspiring. And I'm just so happy to have had the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you, Natalie and Gloria. Appreciate such a candid conversation. It's just very inspiring to hear not only your experience, but just being able to overcome and just be so strong. Even into strength training. So we'll take all of the tips.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Next up, we have Andrea Singhara, the head of marketing at Campari USA. In an industry where brands are inherently social, Singhara explores what experiences and customer engagement looks like in a post-COVID environment, identifying new opportunities to help consumers discover and experience Campari America's portfolio of brands. Our moderator is Dani Duverzak, the head of sales at Brave, a secure, privacy-focused web browser that rewards users for their attention. Welcome to the stage, Dani, as well as Nat. I'm sorry. It's going to be one of those days. Thank you so much, Dani, for tuning in. Andrea? Well, Dani, just before we even get started, I'm noticing a great drum set in the background. I'm going to assume that's yours and you play.
It is mine, and I do play. And during COVID, I taught my son how to play, so he's now playing as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
He just started at School of Rock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a proud moment. And, amazing to even use the time, especially, being home together. So incredible.
Yeah. I guess we're waiting for Andrea to join. Maybe I'll just take a few moments to tell the audience what Brave is. And then once Andrea joins, we can jump right into her. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. So in case you're not familiar with the Brave browser, we are a browser that protects users' privacy. So when you're using other browsers like Chrome specifically, it's big tech and they're watching everything that you're doing. And when you're using Brave, you're completely anonymous. All of your browsing, all your searches, everything that you do in the browser is private. I joined the company 2 years ago and we had 5 million users using Brave. And now we have just under 40 million users using the browser. Oh, here's Andrea. Andrea, I'm just telling people about Brave before we jump into all about you.
Wonderful.
And specifically with Brave, it blocks all trackers and third-party cookies. And when you do that, it blocks all of the programmatic ads, display ads and YouTube. And so we have a very interesting model where users can opt in to seeing advertising as opposed to just getting it thrown at them. And if they opt in, they can get rewarded for their attention. So they can make anywhere from, $5 to $10 a month when they actually see our ads. And our ads that we sell are push notifications and homepage takeovers and something called Brave News, which is like a native ad unit. And we pay consumers with our basic attention token, which is a cryptocurrency. And NFTs and crypto is becoming more and more in the spotlight. Less blockchain in advertising, I would say, but more about ways that brands are using NFTs and cryptocurrencies. And so we're an example of a way that a brand can get involved in that market, because 75% of our 40 million users have traded some type of